It's the Security Weekly News, episode 326. I'm Doug White, and welcome to the week of 17 September 2023. We got SprySocks, Lazarus, Fortinet, Juniper, CISA, Transparent Tribe, AI Art, more news, and Jason Wood on the Security Weekly News.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week, your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News.
Are you constantly thinking about how to keep your enterprise as secure as possible? Get to know Chrome Enterprise, the trusted browser for security-conscious professionals like you. Its ease of use for IT and security teams and added access controls protect the remote, extended, and hybrid workforce, keeping your entire enterprise safe. Don't settle for a browser that compromises your organization. Visit securityweekly.com/Chrome Enterprise now to learn more and start protecting your enterprise like never before. Why does multi-factor authentication have to be a pain for users? It doesn't. Beyond Identity is the most secure MFA on the market and the easiest to use. They ensure that every authentication is multi-factor by default, with phishing-resistant factors that secure access from the start. Beyond Identity safeguards organizations from breaches, data loss, and fraud by eliminating weak phishable authentication factors like OTP and SMS push codes. Go to securityweekly.com/Beyond Identity to get a free demo. That's securityweekly.com/Beyond Identity to get a free demo today. All right, welcome to the Security Weekly News. I'm Doug White. This week, Fortinet, which could really back off the Forta stuff a bit. I mean, they're going to end up like McDonald's if they keep it up. You know, it's like connect your FortiPower Forta cable to the Fortinet McForta router to start using the McInternet. Yeah, anyway. Fortinet released patches for high-severity cross-site scripting issues which affect multiple FortiOS and Forti proxy versions. The vulnerability may allow an authenticated attacker to use specially crafted guest management settings to execute malicious JavaScript code. Yeah. Forta terrible, Forta man. What can we do? Well, Fortinet patched this thing, so you should Forta patch it. I mean, we could patch all our Forti products, Forta girl, and be Forta cool in the Forta future. But other patches that were in this release were there, so there's a whole bunch of stuff. So Forta friends, patch your Forta stuff. Yeah. Well, it is estimated that around 12,000 Juniper SRX firewalls and EX switches are vulnerable to a fileless remote code execution flaw that attackers can exploit without authentication. Juniper disclosed numerous PHP environment manipulation and missing authentication for critical function vulnerabilities back in August. Now, none of those vulnerabilities that they disclosed back then were anything more than medium spiciness. But if you chain them all together, well, it became a critical remote code execution flaw that was rated 9.8, so 5-star spiciness. Or Lou always ordered Thai hot and could eat it, where they grate the peppers on top of the food like raw. And yeah, I mean, I like spicy food, but wow, I think you have to have a lot of experience with smoking and drinking until your tongue is just sort of Teflon. Well, anyway, Tower Labs released a proof of concept that proved all this by uploading 2 files to a vulnerable device and being able to do it. Well, today, VulnCheck released another proof of concept that only utilized one of the PHP environmental variant manipulation bugs, which illustrated that you could skip the uploading of the file and then still get remote code execution. So the VulnCheck report includes a free scanner to help identify vulnerable devices. And if you ran that, I did not, but the article did, they said there were thousands of exposed Juniper devices on the internet that were vulnerable to this. So if you're running Junos OS and on EX or the SRX firewall stuff, you probably should check this article out and then start taking some action about it. I mean, it's going to get exploited in the wild pretty soon, if it hasn't already. CISA, the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency, released new guidance on how federal agencies integrate identity and access management capabilities into their identity, credential, and access management architectures. That's the IDAM and the ICAM. Now, this new program was released as part of the Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation Program, which is called CDM. So the CDM is going to tell you how to put your IDAM into the ICAM. And like, ooh, that kind of sounds like dirty talk. Yeah, it's acronym porn. I'm going to buy that website tomorrow. But silliness aside, this is a positive movement towards some kind of a standard for IDAM, ICAM stuff, which, instead of just letting everybody do whatever they want, they're trying to get federal agencies to use best practice standards consistently instead of just like, hey, whatever. The new guidance clarifies the IDAM scope and capabilities and goes into the include sub-capabilities like PAM. So, and of course, PAM is Privileged Access Management, and ILM, which is Identity Lifecycle Management, and MIM, which is Mobile Identity Management. So NPEs and other non-PKI authenticators are included under CRED. That's Managed Credentials and Authentication. So CDM is advocating new IDAM and ICAM approaches with PAM, ILM, MIM, along with NPEs and non-PKI authentication. E-I-E-I-O. I mean, it was like, this article was like the collection of all known acronyms being put out. But it's good. I mean, it's worth reading the article, but it is, despite all the acronyms, it really is good that they're trying to get best practice ZTA, that's Zero Trust Architecture. So seriously, it is worth a look for your own identity management, even if you're not subject to federal guidelines, because despite all of the acronyms and so forth, we do love them, don't we? I remember taking a FEMA class one time, and it started off with, do not use acronyms because it can be confusing. And then there was an acronym for it. And I was like, isn't the name of your agency an acronym? Yeah, but okay, whatever. Well, Transparent Tribe, which is also called APT36, has been using at least 3 Android apps which mimic YouTube to infect devices with a rat they developed called Capra Rat. And it's a nasty one, too. Once this Capra Rat is installed in your Android device, it can harvest your data. It can record your audio from the microphone. It can record video. It can record what you're watching. It can record what you're doing. It can access your clipboard, pretty much anything. So it's spyware, a la Pegasus or something like that. Presumably, it can determine where you're located as well and access whatever is on your phone. But Transparent Tribe is a Pakistani-aligned attacker, which has been known for using Android apps to attack Indian defense and government entities, particularly those dealing with Kashmir region affairs and human rights activists in Pakistan. And if you're not familiar with that region, India and Pakistan have been, dueling about the Kashmir region for a long, long time. And of course, those two countries don't like each other very much, and so they're sort of next to each other and all that usual stuff. Well, Sentinel Labs filed this report and warned that people and organizations linked to military or diplomacy in India and Pakistan should be very wary of any sort of YouTube Android apps hosted on third-party sites. Now, these apps are not on Google Play. They're distributed outside of Google Play, so it's not your employees searching for them and then installing them so much as someone either social engineering them into doing it or phishing them into doing it. So the malicious apps were uploaded to VirusTotal back in April, July, and August of this year. 2 of them actually are called YouTube, and one is called Pia Sharma, which is associated with, according to the article, a channel of a persona likely used in romance-based tactics. I presume that meant like, hey, meet hot people, click here kind of thing, I guess. I don't know what that means. But the apps request all sorts of permissions on the install. So they basically pops up and says, let me do whatever I want on your device. And of course, a lot of people are just going to click OK and say, yeah, because I want to use this. OK, thank you. Once that Capra Rat code is installed, it can pretty much do anything it wants, and you have granted it permission, so of course. So if you're not seeking romance in Kashmir, this is probably going to be a tactic coming to a theater near you soon regardless, because once somebody uses a tactic like this and it succeeds, other people will very likely adopt it as well. Microsoft AI got caught exposing itself in a GitHub repository, which that sounds dirty too somehow. The exposure left 30,000 internal Microsoft Teams messages hanging out in the breeze. Apparently, this was caused by a single misconfigured shared access signature token, or an SAS, or SAS. Different people say it different ways. Wiz Research said they discovered this while publishing some open source training data on GitHub. And included in this data was 38 terabytes of private Microsoft AI data, which included disk backups of 2 different employees' workstations, which that's a pretty bad thing to expose. All this belonged to Microsoft AI team. A signature token or an SAS, which however you want to say it, is a signed URL, which grants access to Azure storage data in this particular case. I mean, it can do other things as well. But basically, those tokens are used to allow people to access cloud-based data through their web browser. So this is an authentication technique. Now, this particular token was created with a never expiring date. It had other problems. And of course, whenever you create non-expiring tokens, that is always a convenient but really, really bad idea. And if you share those tokens externally, it means you'll never know who has access, kind of like your apartment key. But don't worry, all those chalk outlines when you moved in were probably just kids screwing around. No chance a mass murdering cannibal lived there before you and didn't get their key deposit back. I always had my locks changed because I was paranoid about such things. It was like, did they get these keys back? These seem new. And they're like, yeah, they didn't turn them in. And I'm like, but you didn't change the locks? So, yeah, okay, whatever. But so it might be a good idea, and it always is, to me, to perform a regular review of your cloud data repositories and ensure that you understand who has access and how that access has been granted. So you change the locks occasionally. I mean, basically, this all boils down to data inventory and access controls. It doesn't have that much to do with the cloud. It's all about, do you know what you have? Do you know where it is? And do you know who has access to it? I mean, and those are standard audit questions that you ought to be asking yourself all the time. Because especially as you move into the cloud, you are taking data and putting it where other people may have access to it. So, keep up on that. Lazarus Group, which is a North Korean affiliated attack group that we've talked about many times, they've been kind of quiet this year apparently. but starting in June, they conducted 5 major heists in just 3 months. So these, I guess they were maybe taking a holiday or something, but these 5 heists have resulted in the theft of over $290 million in cryptocurrency this year. The Lazarus Group is a general term that's used to describe a large number of government-sponsored groups in North Korea. And so far this year, the heist included a $100 million stolen from Atomic Wallet back in June, $37 million from coins paid in July, $60 million from AlphaPo in July, and $41 million from State.com in September. I guess they take August off. Maybe they're French. They said they were North Korean, though, but, France is closed in August, so. But anyway, Elliptic said that there's a number of factors that would indicate a $53 million theft from CoinEx last week was also done by the Lazarus Group. Chainalysis said that even though this is a lot of money sounding, Lazarus is actually way down from their 2022 theft figure of $1.65 billion with a B. Okay, I need a new job. I mean, come on. I'm sorry. I didn't make $1.65 billion writing algorithms last year. So maybe evil is calling. Probably not. But, you never know. But last year, of course, they also had a $620 million one-shot theft from Ronin Network, which that really did beef up the old swag bag for last year. But Chainalysis said they were concerned about growing alliances between North Korea and illicit Russian crypto exchanges. Boy, talk about a scary sounding phrase, illicit Russian crypto exchanges. Take my money, please. But, and of course, Kim Jong-un was visiting with President Putin last week and, all that. So don't use hot wallets to store your stash. I mean, just put the money in there that you want to use and keep everything else, in your mattress with the shotgun shells or whatever. A new backdoor Trojan for Linux has been found and linked to the Chinese government. That new Trojan originates from a Windows Trojan called Trochilus. I can never say it right. And I don't actually know how you say it anyway, so it could be pronounced throat warble or mangrove for all I know. But Trochilus, which was discovered back in 2015 by NetScout. The original Trojan ran only in memory and Windows and was really difficult to detect because it was called headless, so it didn't actually write anything to the disk. It was just sitting up in memory somewhere. But NHS Digital said that Trochilus was developed by Stone Panda, who is affiliated with the Chinese government. Now, that original source code was put on GitHub and has been there for more than 6 years, so who knows who has it. But back in June, Trend Micro found an encrypted binary on a server they were tracking since 2021, and the file was called libmonitor.so.2. And Trend Micro searched VirusTotal for that file, and they found an executable Linux file called mkmon. And now that file, when they deconstructed it, had credentials in it that could be used to decrypt libmonitor.so.2. So their conclusion was that this mkmon file is very likely a delivery mechanism for libmonitor.so.2. So the malware ports function from Troculus and combined them with new socket secure implementations. And of course, then Trend Micro named this SprySocks. So this is a brand new Linux-based backdoor Trojan. So Trend Micro says they are attributing SprySocks to a group called EarthLuska, a group that has been around since they named it in 2021. That particular group targets organizations in Asia, and the rest, they do target the rest of the world, but Asia seems to be their big one, and mostly governments. They typically use social engineering to lure targets to watering hole sites where they get infected with this malware. The group is financially motivated, and they target gambling and cryptocurrency companies along with other espionage activities that they conduct. There's a lot of detail about this malware in the article if you are interested in it and how it works and all the grim details. It is there, so check that out if you like it. A pit fighting master. He specialized in the unusual and flamboyant. His drunken monkey with a switchblade style was the hit of the pit fighting season in 2014 and led to the creation of a chain of restaurants, family restaurants, called, well, you know, Drunken Monkey with a Switchblade Family Restaurant. I mean, you've probably been there recently. But please welcome restaurateur and pit fighting master Jason Wood.
Hey, everybody. Happy Tuesday. So the Register posted this article last night, yesterday, discussing some really creative ways in which crypto miners are deploying their mining apps to avoid detection in cloud resources. Now, what they're basically doing is they're taking advantage of different areas that you wouldn't normally think of as executing code, but that do, by design, execute scripts. And they're using that to then turn around and execute their miners. The damages in the article were cited up to $10,000 per day in AWS utilization. So it may be stealthy as to where it executes in the AWS services, but once the bill arrives, I think the victim will probably notice that they've had a problem. The actual source for this article was a blog post, also published yesterday, by a cloud security company named Sysdig, who named the campaign Amber Squid. And so how are they doing that? How are the attackers doing this? Basically, they're executing their code inside of services such as AWS Amplify, Elastic Container Service, or ECS, Fargate, which is tied to ECS, Code Build, Code Formation, and SageMaker. Now, frankly, I was only fairly familiar with ECS and Cloud Formation, so though Code Build's name was kind of self-explanatory, but yeah, I had to go look it up and see what some of these things were, and we'll talk about that as we go along here. The blog post actually published by Sysdig was quite lengthy because they got into a lot of details on how this attack works, contained a lot of the scripts that were being used to execute inside of these services. The summary of the operation basically means, it appears to be, that the attacker is putting out malicious Docker images with the crypto miner built into it and some other functionality. They don't exactly say how, but at some point they make the jump to a victim's AWS credentials and start operating inside of their AWS environment. So they don't really explain how that happened. They just said, eventually switched to AWS specific services. Now, from reading how the attack works, yeah, like I said, it just looks like either they're somehow are harvesting credentials and using that to access AWS, or they're tricking the victims to execute their malicious Docker images, which then the scripts turn around and start executing things. When the malware executes, basically this is going to be kind of involved. It moves along quite a ways. When it starts off, the script executes as part of this image, and it creates a new IAM role. And that role, they turn around, they attach for full access policies to things like Amplify and SageMaker and code build and stuff like that. They give themselves commit permissions and for code and execute, the ability to execute command and access other resources. And then they create a Git repository named test inside of the victim's AWS account itself. And they basically deploy this to every region that they get a hold of and push a malicious Amplify app to those repositories. Then it executes and deploys 5 malicious Amplify apps, which executes the SRB miner-multi crypto token miner and spins up these Amplify images executing this. Now, Amplify is intended to be a development platform. So, obviously it has some need to execute code, but none of it is meant to be long-term or running for any length of time. But the attackers did basically some cute tricks to keep it executing. So they deploy this build out here in this development platform. And one of the scripts that they use to make sure things keep running basically counts from 1 to 6,500,000 in a for loop, which doesn't sound like that would take terribly long, except they added a 3-second sleep in the middle of the for loop, which then turns into running for over 200 days, if you're curious. I had to do the math on that. And then voila, they're mining. They didn't stop there, though. The next one they used was the next script that executed used ECS to deploy a number of malicious Docker images, also running the miner. And the number of containers that it execute appears to depend on how many are available inside of the account and what's configured there for limits. So they get those running. So now we've got Amplify apps and ECS containers running, and then they go to code build, where they then execute 3 new projects that all have the miner in it. They're set to time out at 480 minutes each, because 480 minutes is the maximum time that code build will allow a build to run before it finally just times it out. So they're gating everything they can out of that. And then they keep going. CloudFormation is next. CloudFormation designed to build environments based on templates that are defined by the customers. And since this is going to require the ability to execute some scripts, you can see where this is going. The attacker uses CloudFormation's ability to execute scripts to execute their mining scripts. And actually, they have an example there in the blog post where the code or the script that is running pulls down, installs wget and unzip, and then pulls down a release archive from GitHub, from a GitHub repository. And I did check out the repository. It's actually still live. There's no source code in it, but they have this zip file put up in here as a release image. And so CloudFormation downloads it and kicks it off. Now, I'm not going to keep going with this because we still have SageMaker and EC2 auto scaling, but the same kind of thing is happening here where they're taking advantage of the ability to execute scripts to pull down these images or to pull down their miner and deploy it on these systems and keep things running. Now, what I think is interesting here is just somebody's really spent some time thinking about this. Like, where are the different places inside of AWS services? Do we have the ability to execute code or script or anything like this? And how do we chain all of those together? Most of the time when I see crypto mining attacks, these are not terribly sophisticated. They go for like mass spread, execute as long as they can. The server gets popped. Basically, the miner gets deployed with, they'll run something like XMRig most of the time, but some other miners also occur. And they execute till somebody notices the CPU maxes out and they, log in to see what's going on. But in this case, we've got changes to IAM privileges, and we've got services executing stuff with some very large instances in some cases of resources. And so it sends the billing resource utilization through the roof at this point. I remember reading years ago, AWS's documentation like around incident detection was saying stuff like, well, make sure you put up monitors on how much your billing is. So if it starts spending above a certain level that you think is unusual, then you need to start responding to this. And I thought, wow, that was what do you mean billing stuff for incident response? But essentially, since we're paying for all of this resource utilization or the utilization of the resources, that's where this stuff shows up. And we can't do things like CPU monitors on, I don't know, an Amplify app that's a development platform or anything like that. These are just areas where it's kind of overlooked for security and are not really in our control. On top of having a server to clean up, I mean, you got new AWS resources spun up all over the places. What IAM privileges and roles were created and manipulated. So you're going to have to figure that out. And so that would be a huge problem. I mean, trying to figure out which services were impacted. I mean, you've got over 200 services. So yeah, that'll be a good time to chase down. Most of the time when I look at intrusions, you look at it and you think, all right, well, that was interesting. They got in and did some stuff, but not terribly clever. But this one, this is pretty impressive. Some folks were really spending some time putting together a lot of moving parts to make this happen and found some really crazy places to execute their malicious code. If you want to see an interesting cloud native intrusion, then this is one to go check out. Now, there's a legend in the town of Greendale, California, about a mysterious specter who haunts the town on his BMX bike on foggy nights. No one knows what causes this to occur, but he's most often seen wearing all black and newspaper delivery bags, demanding $2 from everybody he sees. The locals call him Johnny, but we like to call him Dr. Doug. Doug, back to you.
I think I was the one that was naked on the bike, but that's another story for another time. So we're not. I'm not admitting to anything here. So thank you, Jason. And finally, AI created products are filling the shelves online, especially on Amazon. And from coloring books to self-help guides, it's pretty easy to generate artwork, literature, and all this stuff. And we may actually be on the dawn of a new age of kind of on-demand stupid. I mean, like if you just say what you want, something generates it. So, I mean, and they've been doing that with painting for several years where you could go to these AIs. I mean, I even have a painting that was done by an AI that I think is kind of cool. But apparently third-party sellers on Amazon are not required to disclose that the products they are selling are AI generated. So it could get kind of weird, right? I mean, add 3D printing into the mix and it's going to get really strange. And don't even want to talk about the threat to artists and so forth, and the debate about is AI art or and so on and so forth. But it's just basically strange AI stuff that they're trying to sell, and they were using the example of this coloring book. But it certainly wouldn't surprise me to see all sorts of content that getting put together, like deep fakes or deep fake books. Like, hi, ChatGPT, can I get a new novel in the style of Stephen King about a guy who cuts off little kids' thumbs with scissors? Oh, wait, that's Struwwelpeter. So if you don't know the story of Struwwelpeter, it's like a cool German book about all kinds of really horrible stuff, like this guy who shows up with scissors and cuts off your thumbs if you suck them. You tell little kids that to straighten them out. But, but anyway, I mean, there's not a lot of law on this yet, and it's not clear if an AI writes a book, what obligation that AI has for the book to actually be good or accurate. And, if I write a book that is like Stephen King, I might get away with it if Stephen King doesn't notice it and it's not too close to stuff that he's written. But AI can write things that appear factual. I mean, you could literally ask an AI to write a textbook based on the facts that you want included. This is looking at you, Florida. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's very complex when you start thinking about, I want something. I ask ChatGPT to write it, and I say, write me a book where, my cats love me. It'll probably do that, but that doesn't mean it's true. So the danger here is growing that people are going to be using this stuff to provide citations for their ridiculous claims. ChatGPT, write me a book where the Earth is a rotating disc on the back of a giant turtle in the style of Terry Pratchett. Okay, I mean, it probably would. So, I mean, there's a very interesting article here about how to spot this stuff on Amazon. Maybe you do want the stuff. Maybe a weird AI coloring book would be cool, probably. But at the same time, you may want to share it with your employees about, be careful, don't get taken or whatever. That's the news. Thank you, Jason Wood, and I will see you on Friday.